Okay, welcome. We're going to call this subcommittee of the City Plan Commission to order. This is Tuesday, October 9th. It's 3:36 p.m. and we are here, the Ordinance Committee, to ensue a continuing discussion on student housing. First of all, we'll take a roll call.
Harry Bilodeau.
Nicole Birdie. Alexis Thompson.
John Beck, DPD staff.
Cheyenne Mandrakar, DPD staff.
Lisa Tiverton, legal counsel. Kelly Morris, counsel to CPC.
Bob Azar, Planning Department staff.
And Michael Gazdacko, chair of this committee. We met about a month and a half ago and started the discussion. We had many people here to give testimony from all different city departments. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how these various departments interact with student housing, their effect on the neighborhoods, and the planning department has undertaken the monumental task of trying to craft something as a starting point for this discussion in the form of an ordinance. So they're going to go over that ordinance. We're going to talk about it as a committee, and then we'll open up the floor after that to public comment. So I'm going to hand it over to Bob Azar to discuss what they've come up with from the City Planning Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to just give a brief overview of how we got to where we are today, and then I'll run through the proposed ordinance and the various features of it. As you know, since 2015, we've had a number of different proposals for legislation relating to student housing, and they've all focused in one way or another on limiting the number of students that can live together in a dwelling unit. In 2015, there was an amendment to the zoning ordinance, and it was specific to single-family dwellings in the R1A and the R1 districts, so the two single-family zones. And that ordinance prohibited more than 3 college students from living together in a single-family house in a single-family zone. That ordinance was challenged, and the city prevailed in Superior Court. It is currently pending in the Supreme Court. So keeping that in mind, as we've thought about drafting new legislation, we've worked very carefully with the law department, the lawyers that litigated that case in the court, to make sure that what we're doing is not going to upset any ongoing litigation. Earlier this year, there were a couple of different proposals that were put forward that would expand the applicability of the 3-student rule, and one of those ordinances made it to the City Council's Ordinance Committee, which, after taking testimony, decided that the matter should be continued for further study, and they asked the City Plan Commission to continue looking into this. When the City Plan Commission considered that ordinance, which would have expanded the 3-person rule to 2-family houses and single-family zones, the City Plan Commission, felt that it wasn't comprehensive enough, and you asked for further study. So that's what the Planning Department, have been doing for the past couple of months, and we met with you, I believe it was in, I can't even remember, September, I guess, or August. So we got some input from various city departments about the issues involved with enforcement, policing issues, and cooperation with the colleges and so forth. And so since then, we've been doing a lot of studying of other ordinances and trying to understand how far we can go and what would be appropriate, taking into account that there are competing interests on different sides of this, that we have the interests of long-term residents in our residential zones. We also have property owners who rent to students. We have the whole market for student housing. So we tried to come up with something that would try to balance the various interests. There were three principles that we kept in mind as we were working on this. One is to prevent overcrowding of students and to try to mitigate quality of life issues that overcrowding can cause. That there is a balance between the long-term and the short-term residents. That we're providing adequate housing options for all sorts of people. And then finally, consistency, that we create an ordinance that has a broad applicability and that isn't full of loopholes. So with that in mind, I'm just going to walk through the principles of this ordinance that we have proposed. And I want to just state that this is the very beginning of this process. This subcommittee ultimately will make a recommendation to the full City Plan Commission, which will in turn make a recommendation to the City Council, and there has to be public input at all stages of review of this ordinance. This is our best effort, and to those of you on the committee, I apologize that it came to you today. We've been working on this more or less nonstop right up through this morning. So we're not expecting you to act swiftly on this. We want you to consider what we have to say here. We also want you to consider the public comment, and you have the option of asking us to continue to do more study, to revise this ordinance further. You also have the option of passing this on to the full commission and ultimately on to the City Council. So we're not trying to put any sort of pressure on you to get this done. So with that, let me just run through what this ordinance does. First and foremost, we revise the definition of college student that's currently in the ordinance. Right now, we define a college student as an undergraduate or a graduate. In the discussions that we've been having with landlords, with residents, with the institutions, we have felt that the issues involved with overcrowding and problems relate primarily to undergraduate students. So that's a change. So whenever we refer to a college student, we're specifically referring to undergraduate students. So next, and I'm going out of order of the ordinance, Section 1202L is the one that refers to single-family, two-family, three-family, or semi-detached dwellings. And you'll note that number 5 is not underlined. That means that it's not being changed at all. That's the existing regulation. And in response to advice by the law department, we decided to keep that provision intact. So that rule stands in this version of the ordinance. in R1A and R1, a single-family dwelling, non-owner occupied, shall not be occupied by more than 3 college students. So that's being preserved. All right. Next, for all dwelling types, single-family, 2-family, 3-family, semi-detached, and multifamily and row house, there is a across-the-board rule that as of right, no dwelling unit in the just about all of the residential zones, R1A, R1, R2, R3, or RP, shall be occupied by more than 3 college students. That's by right. No special city process. That's allowed. Okay. Now, then we create a process by which owners can rent to more than 3 college students in a dwelling unit in those zones, and that's a special use permit process, and that's available for up to 5 students living in a dwelling unit. And we also say that the number of students in a dwelling unit shall not exceed the number of bedrooms in the dwelling unit. So for example, if you have 4 bedrooms, 4 students. We also say that the owner can't modify a dwelling unit to create new bedrooms. And when the owners come in and apply for the special use permit for 4 or 5 student occupancy of a dwelling unit, they have to provide the city with information specifically about who's the property manager, who to contact if there are issues. They have to provide us with floor plans, and they have to tell us how many college students the dwelling unit is going to be leased to. Next, for properties that already exist in the city where they're being leased to more than 3, we are giving landlords a period of time to register those units with the city, 90 days, and if they can meet all of the criteria in this ordinance, they will be presumed to have a special use permit. The special use permits expire after 2 years, so the owners will have to come back and apply for a new special use permit. In a nutshell, that's the outline of the ordinance. And be happy to take any questions from you.
Okay, let's start with the other commissioners that are present today. Harry, Nicole, do we have any discussion we'd like to have on this draft of an ordinance?
Well, I would first like to say, Bob, that thank you for emphasizing that we do not need to act swiftly. I received this about an hour ago. It's a thoughtful and document. I think that my first reaction to it is that I am just at this point I'm really opposed to the idea that a landlord has to go get special permission from the zoning board. With no specification as to how long that process might take, what's involved. I think it lacks. I see what you're trying to do, and but you know, I think if it were up to me, I would be going in a different direction. I would be thinking more in terms of the landlord's interaction with the colleges and the college interaction with the landlords, such as registering students and so forth and so on. So right now, I think this document is something I could never forward to anybody. So I'm still reading it and thinking about it. But
can you elaborate on what you mean between registering when you say registering between the landlords and the colleges?
Yeah, I think I think that the students are an incredibly valuable part of Providence, and they become more valuable almost every day. And we have a number of universities here. We have, I prefer to see students actually in housing which pays taxes rather than almost in dormitories. What I mean is that if I rent to I live in a multifamily house, I would be very happy to inform the students that they were welcome to become tenants. I wanted them to tell, as part of the lease, that they would tell Brown University or RISD or Providence College or Johnson & Wales or Roger Williams, whoever it is, that they have to report to the housing office at the university that they're living at this address and so forth. And I wouldn't even be opposed to reporting to you who the tenants were at that house or to the city. But I really don't want to have to wait for somebody to come and tell me that it's okay for me to rent, because I've got 3 students, one of whom has a significant other who wants to live with him or her in that 3-bedroom apartment and share it. I don't want to go to the zoning board and say I've got 4 students, 2 of whom are amorously connected, and therefore I need permission from you, especially when the zoning, there's no time limit for what the zoning board responds. It just...
Are you suggesting that there shouldn't be any limit on the number of students who can live in a dwelling unit?
No, I think that the number of students should be appropriate. I think that if we were, we need to define bedroom, for example. We need to define what it is that you, I know when my initial hope for this subcommittee was that we would move toward enhancing a cooperative responsibility between the universities, the cities, and the landlords. That was my hope. This seems to have left the universities completely out of it, which I think is very bad. And I think the universities at one point did orient students to how to live in multifamily housing and how to be cooperative and so forth. And I don't know if they're doing it anymore, but...
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that you know, we do understand that is happening with many or most of the colleges. I'm not sure that the city can write a zoning ordinance or any other sort of ordinance to mandate that.
No, I don't think the city should have much to do with it. I think it should be between the universities and the landlords, and you know.
But how is the city are we supposed to regulate that and to deal with the impacts of the neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhoods, and the other taxpayers that are living near these near college housing apartments or otherwise? What would be a more equitable or fair solution to that? We've talked in the past about capping, and the magic number is hard to define. And when we researched for our last meeting, we found many other examples throughout other cities. Like Boston has a max of 4 to 5 students per dwelling unit in all residential zones, and that's very similar to what this is. There are other instances of unrelated people, and then there are other instances where there's a student housing overlay district, but then again, that again would lay it out for one area as opposed to citywide to make it more equitable across the city. So I'm just looking for some ideas on guidance on that.
You know, if I actually knew that there was a magic number, I would tell you. I just don't, and I don't. You know, as I said, I just got this an hour ago.
I know.
I read it twice.
Yeah.
And there are just parts of it that I think
So
I'd rather read a little more carefully. So that's why I'm saying I'm glad that we're not being asked to act swiftly, because I'm certainly not inclined to act swiftly. I don't know the answer to your question exactly.
So the way I interpret this, Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that
Just a little bit.
the way I interpret this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this ordinance shows that 3 students per dwelling unit across the city in all residential zones. That's 1 family, 2 family, 3 family per dwelling unit are allowed by right.
Yes.
And then up to 5 per dwelling unit. The additional 2 being a special use permit at the zoning board. So that would mean like a 3-family house with 5 bedrooms in each unit would be allowed to have 15 college students with a special use permit.
Yes.
They could
Except,
Apply, right.
They could apply for that.
They would be
Yes.
allowed to have 9 by right, 15 by special use permit.
yeah, and except, with the exception of single-family houses in R1 and R1A.
Okay,
That would be bound by the existing rule.
Does the language, nor shall it exceed the number of bedrooms in the dwelling unit? If you have 2 bedrooms, are you still allowed to have 3 college students?
Yes. Yes, that's right. That's only through the special use permit process where we're trying to get more than 3.
I do like the definition of student being changed. I think that helps with a lot of concern that we've heard in public testimony, both at the City Plan Commission and at this, that undergrads and graduate students might need to be held to different standards. I think that is a good move in this ordinance. Nicole, what are your thoughts on this?
So I share some of Harry's concerns. I know that this is not a small task. I also know from my experience working on legislation at the State House, when you have so many cooks in the kitchen, it can be difficult. And I'm sure there's a lot of different people who are weighing in on this. And I also, just got it an hour ago, so I'd like to kind of really dig in. I am concerned legally, some of the language that I just mentioned, I want it, if this is going to be what's passed on in the special use permit process is what is agreed upon, I want to make it clear that some of these specifics actually are only applying if you're going to a special use permit. But that I think when we have time to do a really thorough analysis, we can point out some of those, because I actually read this as it might apply if you have the 2 bedrooms in a dwelling unit to only allow 2. And I know that that's not what the intent is, but sometimes the way it's drafted and then interpreted after the fact can be different. So if we're going to do this and put all this time, energy, and effort, I think we should really do it right. I think the special use process, permit process, is pretty onerous. And every 2 years, having to go back, every single landlord that has, I don't know the specifics, and I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting, but I know that there are some landlords in the city that they're business owners in this city, and that they do great things for this city, and they might have multiple properties, and that they have to go back every 2 years to the zoning board. Can the zoning board handle that capacity? Do they have the capacity to handle it? If there is a special use permit process, could we create an expedited or some? It just seems really onerous to go every 2 years for a special use permit if nothing has changed. I really like the registering. and I'm just kind of brainstorming and thinking out loud because I think this is a great first draft. I just wonder if there's other ways, and I know you guys have probably thought all about them, but I don't think we have. And I did get the memo with like what some other states have done, but this is important for the city. I think we've had multiple. We all know we've had multiple different city planning commissions where multiple folks have spoken, and the neighbors and the homeowners have a great concern, and I want to make sure that their interests are protected, and I want to make sure that the landlords, we're not doing something that's too overly burdensome. I also do think there is, to me, I felt a lacking of the school's involvement, and I know that we can't mandate in an ordinance, but we could think a little bit outside of the box and maybe try to bring the two together, maybe some cooperative agreement that could be, I mean, I don't know if the landlords are here, but I would imagine they're not going to love this. And instead of putting this into place, like if we could try to bring them to the table with some of the colleges to do some sort of cooperative agreement, maybe we're just the vessel to get folks together. And again, this is a little bit of kind of word vomit here. The renovations, well, the owner shall not modify a dwelling unit to create new bedrooms. What happens if they're renovating a property? I just, like, or if there's an older home that's been used for apartments and someone new wants to buy it and switch it up, and they do have enough room to put in a new bedroom. That seems to me as like something that is a gray area here, and again, I'd like to go through it more thoroughly. Another thing that I was thinking about in regards to an ordinance, I wonder if there is a way, and maybe you guys have the research, and I did look at what the other cities and towns that were researched and the number, that this magic number. But I wonder if there's a way to put the number with square footage or some.
Well, so if I may, we had looked at what the building code says about the amount of space you need for the number of people that are in a dwelling unit. And it's a minimum of 70 square feet for a bedroom. 70 square feet is 7 by 10. That's extremely small. And even when you add up the amount of square footage required for bedrooms and common areas, you could, I think we calculated that the minimum size of an apartment that you would need for an occupancy of 5 is something like 700 square feet. So it's extremely small. Nowhere else in the zoning ordinance do we specify amount of square footage for a bedroom or for an apartment or for an occupancy. So we decided against going in that direction. We did come up with this number of students not exceeding the number of bedrooms, believe it or not, by talking with landlords, many of whom say that's their policy. That's not all of their policies, but at least some are making a good living, with that policy. So that seemed like a reasonable number. If we say that you can't add bedrooms, then that means that you can add bedrooms, and you can add bedrooms that could be up to as small as 70 square feet. So we don't want there to be an incentive for owners to take houses with big rooms and turn them into even code compliant buildings with very small bedrooms. That starts to feel like a dormitory, and that starts to feel like it's not appropriate in a residential zone.
Nicole did raise a good question about the capacity of the zoning board. Have we had any thought about, initial special use permit in person, and then if no violations or issues are on the books for, landlord A, could that be handled administratively so that it wouldn't be a burdensome process as opposed to appearing in person for a renewal of that special use permit?
That's certainly possible. And with respect to the special use permit, we were thinking about, is there a mechanism that's going to be less onerous than coming to the zoning board and putting on witnesses and taking public testimony and so forth. We thought, you know, is there some sort of a licensing process? But there's no license for this sort of thing. You'd have to get special enabling legislation. So we did, you know, one you know, sort of innovation in this is this registration. I think what we were feeling was that it was really important to get the information that we want to have in our building department so that we can enforce the regulation. Right now, we have no idea how many students are living in any given building, and it's clear that what the tax assessor has as the number of bedrooms is inconsistent with what the building records say, so you know, all we know is that we from time to time see building permits pulled to create buildings that have lots of rooms, and some of them are labeled bedrooms and some of them aren't, and the ones that aren't in some cases are in basements, but they have egress windows and they have closets, so clearly there's an intention to maybe convert these into bedrooms. So right now, there is a lot of activity that's happening, both above board and surreptitiously, to create bedrooms to house students. And we felt that there needed to be some sort of mechanism so that if we're actually going to create a rule about the numbers of students, we need to know what the landlord's intentions are, and we need to know that the landlords are complying with the ordinance, so that if we get a complaint, we have something to you know, we can take enforcement action based on the information that we have. Otherwise, without them doing something to disclose to us what's happening on the property, we won't know.
And that was my favorite part of this ordinance, was the registration. I think that is 100% key, and from the other meetings that we've had, we're talking about, you know, could this just be they're already in violation and it's something, it's an enforcement issue, it doesn't necessarily need a new ordinance. That was thrown around at our full CPC meeting. And I wonder, is there a way to force landlords, present and existing, future, to register in some sort of penalty? I don't know if there's a penalty or some, you know, like where they have to register, but this special use permit process maybe isn't part of it. And I don't, you know, it could even, I'm not one of those folks who believe that you need to solve all problems with one ordinance today. I wonder also if there's a way to add this register, you know, we could possibly add a registering process so that we know if folks are in violation of the current, you know, ordinance on the books. Maybe add a portion that actually deals with the number without the special use permit process. See how that goes, and do in a year, in 2 years, let's follow up and see what's going on before we take what I think is kind of extreme actions with this special use process. I don't know. That's certainly possible.
Yeah, I think the second, along Nicole's lines exactly. It seems to me that the university could certainly say to a student, if you want to live off campus, we'll give you permission. They have to ask for permission anyway. And then you have to tell us where you're living, and who the landlord is and who the manager is. And frankly, I think the manager or landlord should be willing to send a letter to the university saying we've got these students living in this building, or to planning and development if you want, although I don't see why you guys want to know. I think that's an important fact that can enhance responsibility on both sides. You know, Personally, I wouldn't mind at all. I mean, there was something in the past about insurance, whatever became of that. I mean, just to change the subject a little bit, but we were supposed to notify somebody at the city who, the name of our insurance companies. And we did that for a year or two, and then nothing ever came of it, and so of course we stopped doing it. But,
I've never heard of that.
I'm so old, Bob, it might have been before you were born, but anyway, it was there at one time. No, I would like to see enhanced cooperation between the universities and landlords, and I agree, there's something about the special use and the inspections, and also the looseness of it, being able to just say that zoning board of review would review something and see whether you've been basically a good boy or a good girl. And that is so wide open, it's horrendous. I think that's what, so that's why I'm kind of coming down. Go ahead.
And I think based on the concerns that were brought to our attention, if we were to modify this so that there is some number, whether it's 3, whether it's 3 to 5, I still would like to talk about that, I think, more. That you have to register so that we'll be able to know and enforce the 3 to 5 number. It's still putting a number where I don't think you'll have, I mean, some of the examples that were brought to the CPC meeting were basically like frat houses, or, the amount of students were over even the example that Michael, that you said earlier today. I mean, those, if you change it in this way and we know that people have to register, you'd be able to enforce that and accommodate the homeowners, the folks living in these communities, their concerns. It might be a way to get at least, and if it doesn't work, then we can go back to the drawing board. But it might be a way to get at the concerns of the homeowners without really putting a really onerous process on the landlords.
Is there a way to grab something similar? Because I think you're trying to approach this the way that Nicole is speaking of, through the existing non-conforming, to say this would pass, so that between the 3 to 5, they are registering and they will have, for lack of a better term, a special use permit for that 2-year period. Is there a way to do that for all first instances, and then to handle renewals without neighbor complaints, police calls, nuisance violations, things like that, without any issue as an administrative process, but then when there is an issue, it gets kicked over, and then they have to appear for their special use permit hearing?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is where it starts to feel like a license, where, you get a license, and then if the city finds out that you're in violation of the license, you have to appear before the board, and the board could revoke your license.
Right.
I don't know that we have I don't think we have any sort of administrative process in the city outside of a license that allows you to do something like that. Although if you do register something, you say what you're doing, we have all the information, and then we find out you're doing something else, it could be a zoning violation.
That's what.
And you have to correct it.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Not a permit, special use.
So then it would be a zoning
But
violation.
just like if you had to put this is the example that's off the top of my head, but if you had to put up a fence for some reason and you didn't, and your neighbor calls on you and reports you, then you'd be in violation. You either have to cure or not.
Or even better, if you got permission to put up a 5-foot fence and you put up an 8-foot fence.
Yes. So like in the case applying it here would be if one of the folks that was living on one of the streets and they are next to a home where they realize, oh, I think they're only supposed to have 5, whatever the number they think is going to be there, but it looks like there's actually 10.
Right.
They would put a
file a complaint.
complaint form. The city would research it, and if their registry is not what it's supposed to be, then they would be in violation and they'd have to cure it.
They'd send out a zoning violation, and then they would, if they didn't cure, they'd have to appear.
Yes.
Okay.
It could go to court. Did you want to turn up your volume, please?
I think there's an enforcement issue because how do we know whether it's a student or not without asking them for an ID? And we're not police officers.
Well, but we could put the onus on the owner. If the owner is saying, I'm renting to 4 students and there are 10 students, we could put, we may not have to card the students. We're gonna ask the owner to either prove that it's not the case or provide us the information. That might be the best we can do.
I think
Well,
that,
it does run to the property, so that's what we can enforce is the property.
yeah, and the
not
property
the
has,
individuals who are living in it.
right, and the property has the bedrooms, and the owner of the property is ultimately responsible, whether it's a special use permit or a zoning violation. So, I would say that that's consistent with our idea going forward. I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't know how we can legally tie the universities into this. I don't know what power we have to request information, registrations when they make their students register, and for us to receive those lists as the city. I just don't know what, if any.
I mean, I don't think we have the ability, I agree, we cannot require, but the city of Providence, I think there has to be some, and maybe I'm being naive, but I do think we could, and we've tried to through this process, but are people sitting down, like not the heads of these universities, but would it be like student services or some head of a department sitting down with some of the landlords? I mean, I know in Providence College, some things happen unofficially between the police department, between landlords, and between the PC security. Like, I know that that's happening on certain levels. And I'm not saying we can mandate it and we can't and what was drafted. I completely agree with you. But let's not use this, why not use this opportunity to try to see if we can bring people to the table.
And I think the last meeting we had, we did have representatives from a few universities that did state that they collect certain information from their students. They do know where their students live. They have methods of, especially, I think it was PC specifically, they do, to their statement, they do have a process of reprimanding the students if there are issues that come about while they're living off campus. So there are universities that are taking the onus on them, but again, we do have a responsibility to the other citizens, taxpayers, residents of the city of Providence to make sure that their quality of life is not diminished, and we have to find some method to try and work that out as well. So I don't think it's a singular path. I think it's both. I agree. Is there any more discussion at the committee level before we open this up to the floor?
Well, I'm trying to think along the lines that Bob mentioned, and I think I'm going to use East Providence as an example, and it's tremendously effective. If there's a violation, if there's a reported violation, even if you were a pedestrian walking by and you report a violation, the minimum housing inspector goes by and inspects, and then he sends a letter out giving you 10 days to remedy it. You have to report it. If you haven't done it, you get a second letter, and then you're in court. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And boy, during those first 10 days, do you go crazy trying to fix things? I mean, because they're not fooling around at all. Now, I don't know if Providence does that. But boy, I know East Providence does it. It's tremendously effective. So,
We do.
no, I know you do, but
I'm saying the housing
maybe
board.
maybe I'm just more saintly on this side of the river. I don't know. I know that Gene, whatever his name is, from East Providence, knows who I am anyway.
I just want to say, I think that this is a great start, and I think that we can build on this and make it better. And to try to accomplish things that we're hearing on all different sides, not just the landlords, not just the homeowners, everyone. And I know a lot of work went into this, so I know it must be difficult to hear some of it, but I am happy to help. I work on this. Like, I think this is important for our city. So thanks for appreciating what we have to say.
You don't have to be delicate about it. We're happy to hear the criticisms of it. I think this is why we're doing this process, and I think it's going to be important for us to hear from the public, because I think I'm guessing we'll probably hear even more varied points of view.
Just before we open up the floor to the public comment, the number 3 we decided on as right previously. This was like 2 years ago, in the R1 and the R2 zones. How did, because I know you put a lot of thought into this, how did you come up with 5 as the cap?
Well, you know, some of it is just some of it is based on you know, looking at records of the typical dwelling unit types in Providence and how many bedrooms they typically have, and you know, it's hard to say that there's anything that's absolutely typical, but we do have numbers, and we can figure out averages, and so we do know that as the number of units in a building increases, the average number of bedrooms tends to go down. So you tend to find that the highest number of bedrooms in the single-family houses, and the lowest number in the multifamily apartment buildings. And so, you know, understanding that a lot of those single-family houses are going to be in single-family zones, the larger ones with more bedrooms, and you know, the number 3 has been out there in many iterations, including the regulations about unrelated people, and we were thinking that there should be some accommodation for larger houses with that might have more bedrooms, and 5 felt to us to be a number that would work for many larger buildings, but would not have so many people living in that individual dwelling unit that it would seem obviously to be too much. I mean, and you know, Harry said that the number of students should be appropriate, and at some point you got to come up with a number, and that's where we arrived at.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anything else that?
I will. If I could make just one other comment. In speaking with some of the landlords out there, and understanding the way that they modify some of the buildings, it's often the case in our understanding that in, say, a 2-family house with an attic, that you might have 2 or 3 bedrooms on the first floor, 2 bedrooms on the second floor, and 3 on the third floor. That's a pretty common layout for a house in Providence. So in that case, you'd have no more than 5.
All right. Well then, any other comment from staff or from the commissioners before we open this up to the floor? We're going to use the sign-in list that I have here. If you didn't get a chance to sign in, when we get to the end, we'll ask for additional people. We would like to ask that you respect the time allotted for this meeting, And we want to try and allow everyone to say their piece. It looks like we maybe there's more than likely a chance that you will get to speak again, whether it's here or at the full City Plan Commission, and then again at City Council whenever whatever is drafted gets forwarded that way. But I think we're a little ways off from that. But we would like to hear from the public, and we'd like to hear from as many people as we possibly can by about 5:30. So I'm going to start with the first person on the sign-in list, and that is Dustin DeZube, sorry. I couldn't read your handwriting, I apologize. You just state your name and your address, and then feel free.
I'm Dustin DeZube, and I live on the east side at 81.
We need to turn the mic on, sorry.
My name is Dustin DeZube. I live on the east side of Providence at 81 Lloyd Avenue, which is at the corner of Brown and Gold.
Thank you.
So I live on the east side. I went to school on the east side. I went to Brown Medical School. And I also am a student landlord. I have about 120 units, and I appreciate the thrust of where this is going, but I think the ordinance is overly broad-reaching. I think that a number of good points were raised. I think narrowing the definition of a student from an undergraduate or graduate student just to a undergraduate student makes a lot of sense. But in its current form, it will significantly impact my current units and curtail any future development in the city. Some of the things that I've been doing are taking abandoned houses that have been dilapidated, boarded up, and renovating them, turning them into modern student housing. I'm doing something right now on Penn Street. It's a house that I bought from the city in receivership. It was a boarded up building. There were actually a lot of drug paraphernalia in the house when I purchased it. And this is something that we're currently fixing up to make it into luxury student housing. This is something that would make it financially feasible that we need to have 4 bedrooms for. So in its current form, I think the ordinance would depress property values, limit future development, and also make it very expensive for students to live off of campus. It's much easier for students to afford a 4-bedroom apartment than it is to afford a 3 or a 2, because the price goes up per bedroom, a smaller number of bedrooms in a unit. I also think that the special permit process is very onerous. I think that in its current state, it would apply to about 80% of my units, which would make it very, very difficult on a yearly or every 2 years to do, and I think it would overburden the zoning board, and I think it's problematic. I do like a lot of the ideas that I did here today. I think registering with the universities makes a lot of sense. I think one thing that could really be beneficial, I really like, for the larger units at least, to limit the number of occupancy to the number of bedrooms. I think this breaks apart, as Nicole mentioned, in a 1 or a 2 bedroom, because I can imagine couples sharing a 1 bedroom, or even 2 couples sharing a 2 bedroom. But for larger units than that, I think avoiding more than 1 student per bedroom makes a lot of sense. I think the number is not 3. I know that it's been looked at. I think that there's a lot of big houses throughout the city where the floor plates are around 1,300 square feet. So having multiple bathrooms, multiple common spaces, you can still have 4 generous sized bedrooms in an apartment like that. And that's pretty typical of the housing stock in Providence. So I think that 3 is just too small. I do recognize also that there's a number of townhouses where, as Bob had mentioned, you can have bedrooms on the upper floor. So it's really the footprint and the square footage of a 3-family house, but the second unit is just comprised of 2 floors. So having more bedrooms there makes more sense. What I think would be really helpful is to create maybe a subcommittee with someone representing the general public, the zoning commission, the city, and the landlords to work on basically redlining this ordinance to come up with something that hopefully can, land somewhere in the middle and appeal to multiple different parties.
Before you leave, can I ask you two very quick questions?
Absolutely.
First of all, any of your comments to this, you're free to direct towards the planning staff. They take all the public comment and they will listen and they report back to us when they do so. Secondly, how many actual dwelling units do you own that have more than 5 bedrooms?
More than 5?
More than 5 bedrooms.
I have more than 5 bedrooms. I just have one.
So 1 out of 100, you said 120 units?
I have 120 units, and there's only one that has more than 5.
Okay.
There are many that have more than 3. With
Okay.
4 and 5.
And then you said that you believe that a registration process is a fair.
I think some way for the students to register with the university, and if the city wants to become involved in that, I think
Yeah,
that's
it's like the landlord registering with the city for that. You're not opposed to that either?
I would want to see the form that takes, but I think that I'd be open to something like that if it's not too onerous.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, the next person on our list is Maureen Taylor.
I'm Maureen Taylor. I live at 89 Keene Street, and I want to thank the CPC for coming up with this document. I do think it needs some work, and I have a lot of questions that I think need to be addressed. I know we have a difference between code enforcement, zoning, and the building code. So how do you define a dwelling, for instance? Who defines what is a bedroom? Because I know you talked about a typical bedroom being 7 by 10, but we're aware of houses right now that have 6 bedrooms on paper that are being converted into, the living room, the dining room, the den. They're all becoming bedrooms. So how do you define what is a bedroom when you're looking at the existing floor plan? Do you include communal space? That's a question. Do you want me to go through all my questions?
I can answer those first 2 questions
Sure.
very quickly. A dwelling is the building that contains dwelling units. Okay,
Right.
So if it's a single-family house, that is one dwelling containing one dwelling unit. If it's a 3-family house, that's one dwelling containing 3 dwelling units. That's defined by zoning.
But a dwelling unit is a kitchen, a bathroom,
Correct.
and egress.
Yes.
Correct?
Bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen. Yes.
Egress.
Egress.
Exactly.
Of course.
That's what we were
Yep.
told by the building
Yes.
department.
Yep. Now, a bedroom is defined under the building code in terms of the amount, the minimum size and the amount of window space. Alexis might be able to speak better to that than I can.
It should have a closet, and the 70 square feet is a minimum, and it's required to have a window with enough square footage for egress requirements. And a closet, yeah.
Yeah, okay. What about enforcement? We've had trouble with enforcement. How is that going to work under this? Special permit enforcement. I am in favor of the registration of students from a safety perspective. If there were a fire in one of these buildings and the landlord was saying there were 4 students and there were 10 or more students, wouldn't the fire department want to know how many people they needed to rescue on a good day? I think that's it for now. I think there's a lot more questions that will come up. We just got this just a few minutes ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person on my list is Nina Markov.
Hi, I'm Nina Markov at 76 Keene Street.
Thank you.
So I just got this too, and it's long, so it's hard to digest, but I had 2 first, I thought that this group passed our San Zurier's ordinance and decided to, and as well as passing that immediately was the recommendation and studying additional solutions. So I don't know what happened to that.
Just a point of clarification, we don't pass any ordinances
We'll
here.
recommend
We recommend to the city council.
Right.
The city
That's what I
council
meant.
takes up their business to actually pass the ordinance.
Right.
We can only recommend a passage or not.
Right.
We
Get it.
did recommend, and we also, and that was for the 3 bedrooms to apply to the other
To non-conforming
zones.
two-family houses. and-
Correct, to the 2-family zones as well. But we also said we needed to investigate this issue
Right,
further
right, okay.
so that it applies to all zones. The city council also said that this needed further investigation.
Right.
They did not pass that ordinance. They kicked it back to us for the investigation we're doing.
Okay, okay. Well, I guess I feel like this ordinance still doesn't address the problems in our R1 and R1A zones. For example, I mean, if you are going to allow 5 students per dwelling unit, then the houses that we were talking about the last time we were here, they're pretty big houses, and they could turn dining rooms into bedrooms or whatever. So that means those houses would still be allowed to have 10 students, and that's in a single-family zone. Usually when you live in a single-family zone, you expect it to be low density. So as I understand this, in those non-conforming two-family houses on our street, which is an R1 zone, you could still have 10 students, and so isn't much different from the 13 students that the landlord was going to have. It's still a lot, it's still like a mini dorm, especially when there are 2 houses right next to each other. That means there are going to be 20 students in our single-family neighborhood. And actually there is a house being used as a single-family house now that is on the books as like the other 2 houses that we were talking about, is on the books as a 3-family. It's now being used as a single-family. So if that were ever sold to the same developer, he could theoretically put 15 students in that one. And so that means we would have 3 mini dorms on our street.
I'm going to let Bob take that because I have a feeling there's a bit of confusion here.
Okay, yeah, so I think there's a lot to respond to. First of all, when we talk about density in the zoning ordinance, we specifically talk about not the number of people who are living in a given building or in a given block. It's the number of dwelling units per unit of land. So single-family zones in a perfect world are developed with nothing but single-family houses. And if you have a similar size lots in a 2-family zone and it's developed for all 2-family houses, the 2-family zone is going to be twice as dense in terms of the number of dwelling units. The number of people living in those zones is not something that zoning speaks to, with the exception of what we're talking about. You could have in those 2-family houses families of 5 or more people in each of the dwelling units, and you'd have 10 plus people in each of the buildings. So
I understand that, yeah.
Yeah,
We're talking
so
about students, though.
I understand that we're talking about students, and that's why we've drafted this ordinance. So like I said, there are a couple of provisions in here that I think speak to what you were talking about. One is that we're saying that you would not be able to create new bedrooms, and 2, that you would be limited to the number of students. That you can't have more students than you have bedrooms. So
Right.
in one case, I believe there's a case where one of the 2-family houses has a very large unit and a small unit. And if that small unit only has 3 bedrooms, no more than 3 students there. If the larger unit has 6 bedrooms, no more than 5 students there.
Right, except, those units are can be reconfigured, right? So that.
No, they can't, because
Oh,
that's a
I thought-
non-conforming 2-family house in a single-family zone. You can't reconfigure those.
Oh, the way I read the zoning code is that you could, if you don't increase the number of units, you could reconfigure how they're, you could make one unit bigger and one, that,
I don't think you can change, if it's non-conforming by use, I don't believe that you can change. We can take a look at that.
okay, because,
But
yeah. could
I
you
don't
take a
believe we
look
can
at
do that.
Because that's how I read it, that you can, it says specifically, as I remember, that you can change how the units are configured, you just can't make more units. But anyway, you're the zoning experts, not me, that's just how I understood it. So, but the bottom line is that those two houses will still, this won't address really our concerns, because those two houses will still be able to have 10 students apiece, because they're big houses, so the living rooms and dens could easily be turned into bedrooms. How would you define how many bedrooms? I mean, it's listed as a 6-bedroom house, but there's like a double parlor with sliding doors, so that could be 2 extra bedrooms, without dividing up bedrooms, right?
We're saying you can't do that under this ordinance. You can't convert living rooms to bedrooms. You can't create new bedrooms.
Okay, well, that's somewhat helpful, I guess. But it's still not clear how you're going to define what's a bedroom to me. Because, as I remember those houses, there's a den downstairs. I mean, who's to say what can be a bedroom? That's what I guess I'm trying to understand.
That would be up to the building department to decide if it meets the code for a bedroom.
Well, they're definitely over 70 square feet. I mean,
They have to have windows for egress. They have to have a closet.
we can't you build that, so you wouldn't be able to build a closet? I mean, this is minutia, but what I'm saying is that,
Is there a number, is 5, if 5 is too many,
yeah.
is there a number that's not too many?
Well, I mean, I would think that what you had, 3 would be great. I mean, 4 maybe. That would at least limit those 2 houses to 8. But it would still be 6 because they're double the pairs of houses, so there would be 16 students there even with 8. So but if they're, it's still going to be a student blooming house basically. I mean, 3 would be fantastic because then it would be 3 per unit, 6. That seems reasonable, but 10, which is what those houses would be able to get a permit, because those rooms that you're saying can be turned into bedrooms, they meet those criteria. They have windows, they have enough square footage, a parlor that closes off and has a closet. I don't see how you're gonna say that can't be used as a bedroom, I mean,
Well,
you have a
there's
way-
also, I mean, if you do have a dwelling unit that legitimately has 6 bedrooms, whether you're creating them or not, and there are dwelling units like that, and the limit is no more than 3 students, are you suggesting then that there are rooms that aren't going to be available or that are you saying that we should create a regulation that won't allow the landlord to take advantage of all of the leasable space in the building?
I guess all I'm saying is that it feels to me like in a non-conforming 2-family house in a single-family zone, that 10 is going to be too much. Because then the next house that is sold is a non-conforming 2-family. It's always been used, by the way, as a single-family. It's just way on the books for a long time, historically as a 2-family. So all these non-conforming 2- and 3-family houses that are currently being used as single-family houses are going to get to have, 10, 15 students in them, according to this thing, and that's going to, totally change the character of our single-family neighborhood. So I don't know. Am I making myself clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Very much.
So I don't want to keep talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next member of the public, Bill Devaney.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Devaney. I live at 52 Benefit Street. My first comment is to point out what I think is an omission under section L, dwelling, single family, 2-family, 3-family, or semi-detached. Item number 6, no dwelling unit in a single family, 2-family, 3-family, or semi-detached in the R1A, R1, R2, and R4 I think the omission is R3.
Yep, thank you for that. That's a typo.
Okay. My second comment has to do with the notion of the special use permit, which seems to me to be a good idea, but only really if there's going to be enforcement. Without enforcement, nothing seems to work very well. So I would direct your attention to the very last page, item number 3. Special permits, if there are no zoning or property maintenance violations relative to the property for the previous 2-year period, or that prompt action is taken. I'm assuming that means code violations. I'm assuming that would mean municipal liens against properties. And I would hope that you might include under this the historic preservation standards of the Historic District Commission, which go not for all properties, but for properties in the Historic District overlay, or that are regarded on the National Register of Historic Places as registered as historic properties. Because I think the standards there are very, very, very important. And my other comment about this would be prompt action. What would prompt action mean? That prompt action would have to be taken to remedy these violations or liens within what amount of time. And it sounds like kind of overregulation, but I can tell you if you had a landlord in a neighborhood, for example, that had 83 second notices of violations on his properties in one neighborhood, and 31 municipal liens on those properties over the last 4 years, it would not be a trivial matter to say enforcement is very, very important under these circumstances. I don't know what this will mean in terms of staffing, if these were to be enforced. If regular inspection of these properties was to take place, and I would argue that it should, that at the point of the initial application for a special use permit, there ought to be a visit to the site to make sure that what's said on paper really lines up with reality. That and just the code violations and lien process. Inspection and Standards is going to have to triple its workforce to be able to handle this, and I think they should. I think they should have a long time ago. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, member of the public, Tom Archie.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Archie. I'm at 85 Keene Street and appreciate the opportunity. You realize this is, I'm sure, a very difficult process to put together and trying to find the best for all solutions. I think the recommendation of getting the universities, somebody from the outside, the public, as well as the committee and landlords together to do a deeper dive into it would really be helpful, because you get all points of view in that. And just having looked at it in the last hour, it's really difficult to make comments. Just one question, though, or a couple questions ahead, is how do you manage the process of preserving a neighborhood? Because what this will do is allow a neighborhood really just to be purchased up and turned into multifamily units or student housing. So what's the provision in managing that?
Well, property can be bought and sold on the open market by anybody at any time. I don't think that anything in zoning preordains that a neighborhood that has a particular character today must have that character tomorrow. The zoning is a tool that we use to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and it has certain limitations. So we cannot mandate, for example, that buildings be owner-occupied. We can't mandate that they be occupied by families.
But you're limiting the number of students in the house.
That's what this ordinance would do.
So it's doing. So it's the number of it. Now you get 10 or 15 into an area, it makes it very lucrative to continue to buy up houses in a neighborhood. So you are allowing it by doing this. You're not limiting it.
We can't limit who can buy and who can buy property and who they can rent to.
No, but you limit the attractiveness of doing it.
Certainly, yes.
Arguably, our attempt at what we're doing now, it puts a limit on it instead of not having anything. Right now, there's nothing.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's our particular point of view that just the mere fact that students live off campus is not in and of itself a bad thing. You know, Keene Street is smack in the middle of College Hill, after all, and you know, it existed. Brown University and RISD, they've existed there for a long time, and students have been living in the neighborhoods for a very long time. So I think there should be a reasonable expectation that people who live within the midst of universities are going to have college students living in their midst. It's just a matter of how do we control the negative consequences of that. Again, we're trying to find a balance here, and I think you know I think there are. I think Harry pointed out that there are some positives to having students living
I don't
living
deny
off campus.
I don't deny that. I went to Brown.
Students.
I went to Brown
Me too.
in '82, and I moved here 2 years ago. My family did, and to Keene Street, because we wanted to live on the college campus. My wife works for Brown. So, and we live next to students all over, and it's a great environment. What you're just trying to say, when we moved here, since that time, you've watched multiple houses on the street now become student housing. So what used to be a residential neighborhood is now becoming a student dormitory street. And that's what you're trying to see. So when I moved to an area and bought it and thought this was a great place to be, is it going to continue to be that way, and how do we zone that? And we talk about the whole Thayer Street plan and what you want to do to create that environment, and you're doing the same thing for the neighborhoods. And so that's just the concern that you have in trying to do this. And the last piece is really, as you look at the enforcement of this, you really get concerned, as somebody mentioned, the staffing to really enforce it, because enforcing what you've got today is very difficult, I'm sure. And now adding to it special permits and all of it that goes on with it, and any violations, really just adds a great deal to your staffing. So you just got to be aware of it. Otherwise, we'll put rules in place to allow things to happen, but no way to prevent, unexpected consequences. So, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Next member of the public is Bob McCann.
A little sloppy, right?
Yeah, it trailed off there at the end. It's really read it. Welcome back. Please state your name and your address.
Bob McCann, 15 Bayside Avenue.
Thank you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. I just jotted down some bullet points from listening to the discussion. I think we all want the same thing. I think we want a great Providence. It would appear to me that pretty much only the east side of Providence is represented here from all the people speaking and whatnot, but I'm representing Elmhurst, where I own quite a few properties. We want to have safe communities, want everybody to be happy. We want our residents to be respectful to the neighbors. And quite frankly, in our area, it's working great. The landlords, the colleges, the police, the local community organizations, we don't meet on a regular basis, almost monthly, and things are working great. It seems to me that up on the east side, there's some issues because you have one problem landlord. That's the white elephant in the room, isn't it, guys? Nobody wants to admit it. It's one problem landlord. My concern is this. Harry and Nicole brought up some great ideas. Dustin, Brown University medical student, he's a landlord now, investing in the city millions and millions of dollars because he came to school here. John Beck, a Brown University graduate, is working for the city of Providence now because he came to school here. So I think we want students here. I think that obviously you have to deal with town-gown relations, and I think that we want the students to be respectful. We also want them to be safe, so we don't want them overstuffing houses. We haven't talked about that at all, but that would be a concern for me as a landlord and as a resident. I think this is very extreme and draconian. I think that what we need to do is we need to sit together and have a city roundtable. We need to have residents from the city. We need to have the city representatives that are here. We need to have landlords, the colleges, the universities, possibly even the police. We haven't done that. I thought that was the purpose of this subcommittee that Harry Billow had introduced a couple meetings ago, and that was to bring everybody together. Maybe this is it, but might it have made sense to maybe do that before we crafted this? Just giving you my opinion. I think that you also need to consider, if you were to pass something like this, the citywide impact. Now, the east side of Providence is outstanding. It's awesome, okay? And if you didn't allow any students to live there, people are still lining up to rent places there, okay? You cannot say that about every other area of the city, okay? Now, the market's hot. I know Providence is number 7 right now, and I happen to love Elmhurst. I love the West End. Those are 2 of my favorite places, even more than the east side, but that's just my preference. If you implemented something like this, this would be very, very detrimental to most landlords' businesses, okay? So that's going to discourage investment in the city. It's going to discourage a lot. And we don't just invest in the city. We are very actively involved in our neighborhood, planting trees. We buy over 3,000 turkeys every Thanksgiving to help the poor of Providence. We do a lot of great things. It seems to me that none of that was taken into consideration. I would like to know, do you know how many houses are impacted if this were to pass? You don't have to answer now, just food for thought. Do you know that? How do you know that? How many in Elmhurst? How many on the east side? How many in the West End? Graduates versus undergraduates? I don't think, I could care less about that. Students are students, guys. In fact, graduate students tend to have less money because their parents just paid for 4 years of their college. And they may say to their kid, hey, you're contributing now. You have to help out. You have an internship as well. So they would be the ones who might want to have a share a bedroom. So if you're going to eliminate grad students, that could create an extra problem, something you probably hadn't thought of. I think this committee is moving a bit fast. I think that we need to have the roundtable. We need to sit down. We need to look at the impacts. I see Providence College represented here today. I know at the last meeting, Johnson Wales was here. We've got it going on in Elmhurst, and it's working out great. We're not without our issues, but we're working together. You guys need to sit down with this problem landlord and sit down with your neighborhood associations and work this out. That's what needs to be done. And stop dragging the rest of the city in. Because quite honestly, I could have brought 10 neighbors from our neighborhood that love having the students, love having us around. Because the properties that we purchased were dilapidated, crappy houses, guys. I can show you before and after pictures that would blow your mind. I actually brought Bob Azar through one of them recently. And if I took him through now, it's probably nicer than half of our houses in here. Okay? So I just want to conclude by saying that we can't have it both ways. So Providence, downtown, the cranes, everything's going. Great young kids like John Beck. This guy here who moved back to Providence because he attended Brown University. We can't have it both ways. These kids need a place to live. Okay? And on the east side, I get it. You guys, it's tough. But understand, there's no Thayer Street, there's no nothing without students either. I think on the east side, you need to get Brown University more involved. Because PC doesn't take any crap, neither does JWU in our neighborhood, and they put the hammer down. We're already registering our students with the colleges, with the police. We all work together. It sounds like you're not doing that on the east side. So why don't you take care of your business on the east side rather than dragging the rest of us in? It's ridiculous. Thank you.
Okay, before you leave, a couple questions for you.
Okay.
First of all, we all do like the students here. That's part of the culture of Providence, and that's why we're doing this, because we want to protect the students and the livability of the city for all residents. Part of the problem that you mentioned is you asked how many houses will be affected by this. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem is we don't know. There's no mechanism right now to know. There's no regulation. There's no registration. There's no nothing. That's why we're here. So I'm going to ask you the same 2 questions I asked Dustin. The registration process, you sound like you're open to that. You have no problem with that.
I would not want the intro like Dustin did. I want to see what you're proposing. But right. We already do that now. We work with the colleges, the police, everybody.
But in some mutually acceptable fashion, yeah. you don't think that's...
It sounds good to me.
And you own quite a deal of real estate. How many individual dwelling units are over 5 bedrooms?
We have a number of townhouses, as Bob had mentioned earlier, like the 2nd and 3rd floors. So that would be over 5?
Individual dwelling units over 5 units, or 5 bedrooms, sorry, 5 bedrooms.
Over 5 bedrooms. I would say, I don't know, 10? I own 125 houses.
So 125 houses with 300 plus dwelling units.
Yeah,
And of those, about 10 would have more than 5 bedrooms.
yeah, townhouses, exactly, bedrooms. One solution might be one person per bedroom.
Right.
I mean, that's a fair thing. To go with 3 per floor, I think it's a bit silly. We have,
It's not per floor, it's per dwelling unit.
no, I understand that, but let's say you had a dwelling unit that had 4 apartments on the first floor and 4 on the second floor. I actually took Bobby's or through a unit like
No, but
that.
an apartment is a dwelling unit.
I understand. What I'm saying is, the way you wrote this, without any input from anybody other than your team,
Had to start somewhere.
I understand, but to me, 3 people, that's a bit absurd. We have units that have 1,600 square foot on one floor and 1,600 on the other with 4 and 4 bedrooms. We could have put 6 bedrooms and we didn't.
But so they're 4 and 4 bedrooms.
Correct. But that would be a violation according to this.
It would be a special use permit.
Let's not even talk about how silly that would be. Please, everybody's laughing.
We're already discussing, you know, the ways to do that. I'm trying to.
I know, but
get to
we
the
all
point-
know it's
I'm trying to get to the point of, is 5
For me, in a perfect
be above
world,
and beyond?
I would like 6 if it was possible, because I have some units that would be 3 on the third, second, and 3 in the third, but they're bedrooms. And they're not closets, as someone was mentioning. These are legitimate bedrooms with closets and egress and beautiful, beautiful units.
Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you guys.
Next, member of the public, Ann Metcalf.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Ann Metcalf and I live at 100 Lloyd. I have a general question and it is regarding the backdrop of Keene Street issues. And also there was an issue on my street with a home literally next door who was purchased by a brown grad parent who put in 8 girls in there for 3 years. And it wasn't until she graduated did he admit there was an issue, and then he sold the home. So my question is, why can't the writ of mandamus be enforced? Thank you.
What do you mean by writ of mandamus?
Well, it's something that says that you have to, if there's a law, you have to officially order it to be executed.
I think you've got a little bit of a legal concepts confused. What you're really asking is why aren't we enforcing the law?
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is craft a law that is enforceable.
But there are existing laws right now. Why not enforce the existing laws?
There is no existing law that's enforceable.
The 3 students per home?
In an R1.
In R1.
In a
Yes.
single-family
In a
house.
single-family house,
Single-family
in
home.
an R1.
So
But that law has only been in existence since 2015.
Well, we went to court, and it took literally, at the end of 3 years, did the court acknowledge it was an issue, and they were going to, he had a summons for it, but it was at the end of his lease. And then what happens also is that the girls leave for the summer, and you get a whole new crew for the summertime. A whole new crew of kids.
So again, this is a specific incident, and we're trying to do this on a citywide basis, not doing it for neighborhood by neighborhood. Again,
I'm sure I'm not the
we
only
worked-
one who
No, I
experienced
understood.
this.
This was new as of 2015. I believe Councilwoman Ryan presented this to the City Plan Commission, and that's how we got to the 3 students in an R1 zone. And then again, recently, we're working on amending that and having this discussion. So if there's no law in the books, I don't know how it
But
can be
but that was the issue then, when we did go to court, was the 3 student issue, so living in one family home. So someone was using that, so it was there.
Okay, thank you.
I think that the chair just said something that's important and that everyone needs to understand, that we can't fix every single property. There are always going to be properties that either are in violation and have to be prosecuted, or that somehow are a problem. Whether there are 5 students or 3 students, they may still be a problem. We are trying to address a global issue throughout the city, and we're not really looking at any specific property. We can't fix property by property. We have to come up with a way that is a health, safety, and welfare mechanism for the general issues that are caused by overcrowding with students.
But if a complaint is brought to you, why is it not addressed?
I don't have any way of knowing that there was a complaint or that it wasn't addressed.
This was.
I can't respond. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, that's partly what we're trying to come to an understanding of. You took this complaint forward, it went to court, which is to your credit, and yet it devolved over 1,000 days or more. You know, that's obviously unacceptable to planning and development. It's unacceptable to us. The council is right about the fact that it is, yours is an individual case, but it is symptomatic of a lack of enforcement. And for some reason, you know, if there was a law in 2015 that said you're not allowed to have more than 3 people, tenants in a non-owner occupied single-family house, then, and there were 6 people there, and if they were students and they were registered with the university would certainly know that this was R1.
But again, the city wouldn't have any enforcement. That's
Yes,
why we're here.
and
That's
that's-
why we're
So I suspect, Mr. Bilodeau, that she's talking about the 3 unrelated persons
Yeah.
step ordinance that predated this 2015 student housing ordinance, in that the court was not anxious to enforce that. It's just my suspicion, and absent any other details,
yeah, this isn't the forum to
That's
answer
not-
that. I
yes.
apologize. The next member of the public, Chris Tompkins.
Good afternoon, Chris Tompkins, 198 Hope Street, proud resident of Providence for 19 years. I went to a graduation speech about 4 or 5 years ago, and a self-made billionaire made one line that stuck with me. And the line was, keep it simple. So I thank the Planning Department and Bob Azar for the zoning ordinance draft. I know a lot of hard work went into it. Let's just put this aside for the time being. So just for historical reference.
For the sake of time, we don't want to bring up.
This is going to be very quick.
Okay.
I've been interrupted before. I sat here for 45 minutes. I'm going to say what I have to say. Please. In December of 2017, I testified in front of this body regarding Brown University's off-campus housing. Bob Azar had a conflict. He wasn't able to attend. This document was distributed to each member. It was also sent to the Planning Department in PDFs. Just pure facts. So just to summarize the facts are, in 10 years, Brown University has dumped 1,000 undergraduate students into College Hill. Despite all the institutional master plans, 1,000 undergraduate students have descended upon College Hill. So why do we have a problem? That's why we have a problem. Then in April, at this body, we had the opportunity, I testified again with my wife, and clearly what's happening in a factual way is Providence is becoming a drive-through city. You come to college for 4 years and you move on to a global city. So students are great if some percentage decide to stay here. But if they just move on, it's a race to the bottom. It's how many students can you pack into square footage. So I'm a believer in students as long as some percentage choose to stay here. If they're just driving through, there's no benefit to the city of Providence. So here are my conclusions. Cut it short. Neighborhoods need to be celebrated and stabilized immediately, quickly, because people are about ready to move to Foster or to Westport, Massachusetts, where many Providence realtor brokers live right now. They come to Providence to broker sales to landlords. If you enforce the 4-year-old comprehensive plan, it's only 4 years old. If you enforce the 4-year-old zoning ordinance, it's only 4 years old. Think of the amount of demand for housing there would be in the city of Providence, the amount of building that would happen, the amount of tax revenue that would be generated if you enforce zoning, which Andrew Tights testified to in the city council only a few months ago. Andrew Tice, a recognized zoning expert. There's no reason why zoning cannot be enforced. What's on the books right now? Then the 30+ acres of vacant land on I-95, there are going to be apartment buildings going up all over the place. But right now, we're just racing to the bottom. It's how many students can you pack into a building per square foot. The city needs to get out of the student housing ordinance business. There needs to be an agreement between the mayor's office and the higher educational institutions that the residential life departments of each institution is responsible for determining where their students live and that they're abiding by the city's codes that Bob Azar and the planning department worked so hard in developing. It's a memorandum of understanding. There are no ordinances. There are no lawyers floating around. It's done. And twice a year, in September and January, the well-paid administrators of these higher educational institutions with a lot of advanced degrees will certify to the city of Providence where their students live and that they're living in code-abiding properties, period. Otherwise, we're headed to New Haven 2.0, where there's a little enclave surrounding Yale University that looks really nice, and then there's everything else. Now, before I move on and let some other good citizens speak, I just want to highlight 2 or 3 facts. The gentleman from the planning department who worked so hard on researching other cities. How about Georgetown? Georgetown is in a historic district where a lot of affluent, powerful people live. So affluent, powerful people have a lot of stroke. So at Georgetown University, there was a 20-year neighborhood agreement that's online between the city and Georgetown University. Because the residents of Georgetown said, we aren't going to take it anymore. This is an online document. There's a cap on the number of undergraduate students at Georgetown University as the main campus. An absolute cap. Now that's what a comparable study should be, not Rochester, New York. Brown University, hate to pick on Brown, nice folks work there, nice students. But you got to follow the money sometimes. In the current year, the off-campus housing fee of Brown University is $853 per student. $853 per student for the privilege of living off campus. Of course, they can't house them, but $850 per student. So let's say you have 1,500 students living off campus. Maybe it's 2,000. At 1,500 students, that's free cash flow to the university of $1,288,000. At 2,000 students, these are undergraduates.
We get that.
It's $1.7 million.
This doesn't have basis.
Yes, it does, because it's called follow the money. It's all about money. Final point. I think this has been touched on before. Landlords, God bless them, nice business. A lot of them do a lot of good work. They charge on a per head basis. We all know that. How does the city assess the properties? They're assessing the properties on a unit basis. So there's one of the great economic arbitrage plays in the United States going on, because they're charging on a per head basis, but the city's still stuck in the 20th century, taxing these units as units. So it's just incredible how the city is being gamed. Not that I thought, these are business people, but we need to wake up. There's a huge arbitrage, but why is there such a huge demand for housing? Because a lot of people are making a lot of money at it. So, in summary, let's keep it simple. Get out of the ordinance business and get into the memorandum of agreement business between the universities and the mayor's office, and wrap and pack and tie it in a bow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next member of the public, Attorney Hammond, come on up.
Thank you. For the record, Attorney Nicholas Heaney and Darrell Everett. I represent two gentlemen who already spoke this evening, so I won't repeat what they said because I think they've made some good points. I've done a lot of work in the city for Mr. DeZube in his efforts to redevelop properties, particularly vacant properties over the last couple of years. Many of them have been done with public-private partnership with the city. And I have the privilege of also representing Mr. McCann in the Ocean Island group. But I've lived in the Elmhurst neighborhood of Providence for 27 years, 12 of which I lived in the shadow of Providence College on River Avenue, about 3 houses up from the PC, what they all call the old baseball field. So I've lived in that neighborhood before Bob McCann and the 02908 Club, and I still live there after Bob McCann and the 02908 Club. And I will say that the neighborhood that exists there today, on Pinehurst, on Huxley, on Oakland, and Eaton Street, and what they've built, should be praised by the city, not condemned. And it's development and investment like that that should be encouraged by the city, not pushed away. What concerns me most about this ordinance is the effect it has on existing property, on the tens of millions of dollars that these two gentlemen have invested in the city. Mr. DeZube over the past 5 years, Mr. McCann over the past 18 years, he's been doing this. And now they're going to come before a zoning board every 2 years to protect an investment that they made years before. For Mr. McCann, he's got 125 properties. So I'm going to come in here for 125 special use permits. For Mr. DeZube, I know he mentioned the units, he's got about 40 properties. 40 special use permits. Now I understand a mechanism like that for new investments and new properties. I wouldn't recommend it because I think it will scare people away from making those investments. But for property that you'd otherwise be grandfathered in under 45, 24, 39, to now have to come in for a special use permit, I think is tremendously, tremendously concerning. And perhaps the most, I think the area of this that I think needs the most work And I actually don't think you can even do it. I don't think it would survive a declaratory judgment action on a zoning basis. I know the pending suit now is a constitutional claim, but just from principles of zoning law, I don't think it would survive. But they're two reasonable gentlemen, and they're reasonable organizations. And they're willing to work with the committee, they're willing to work with the council, the planning commission. I think they both said, quite honestly, that one student per bedroom was something that they found to be reasonable. Most of Mr. McCann's properties, the particular apartments have more than 3 units. Most of them have about 4, bedrooms. About 4 bedrooms. And I went to Providence College. I've lived in that area. The problem is not with the kids during the living hours. The problems are when you have parties off campus. And whether it used to be in the bars in the area, it used to be those establishments that were the issue. Now most of those are closed, and now they're all in the neighborhoods. That's when you have the problems with the party issues. It's not the living, it's not the 9 to 5, it's not the how many kids are living in a particular unit. It's when the kids go wrong that you have the problem. And I think punishing the people that have invested is not the way to go about it. But we're willing to work with all you folks on this this draft. Worked with Mr. Azar many, many times on many projects. Eminently reasonable to work with, and we just hope that we can be a part of the process going forward.
Thank you. The next member of the public is Andres Eichstadt. If I mispronounced that, I apologize.
Hi, I'm Andres Eichstadt. I live at 85 Power Street, and I am new to Providence. My husband and I just moved here in October, and we own our house, and our house is a historic home in College Hill, and we bought it to own and to live in as our family. But we also bought it as an investment. I don't know how long we'll live here, and our house has 8 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. And they're not tiny. It's a big house, and we've put a lot of effort into maintaining it and keeping it up and making it beautiful and protecting our investment. And we do want to live in Providence as long as we can. We love what this city has been for our family. But we don't know, and I would like the option of being able to move out and know that I could hold on to my house and rent it out and then come back in a few years. And there's no way that we could afford to do that with a cap on it being 3 people or 5 people. It's a big house, and you would want to charge per bedroom, and there's 8 bedrooms. So I know that it has been thrown around a lot of, are there many units with over 5? And I just want to be a voice to say, yes, there are, in College Hill in particular, there are a lot of houses that are very big. And, our next door neighbor there's 1 man in the home. It's as big as our house is. And I would much rather have a bunch of students there than 1 man that's only there 2 or 3 nights a week. And I would feel more safe actually in my home if there were more people living around me. And I also want to mention that we live across the street from a dorm. And in fact, there's a bar inside the dorm. And we have had no problems at all. I've been there almost a year. It's been absolutely fine. We have enjoyed the students there. And yes, in front of our house, is where they come and get their Uber and Lyft rides. And it's not like we never see the students, but we enjoy them, and they've always been absolutely wonderful. I have 2 children, ages 4 and 2, and I have never felt uncomfortable with them. They've always been very respectful. I just want to give that perspective to this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the last question on our list. Before we close, Councilman, did you want to say anything, or you just?
Oh, yes, please, thank you. Yeah, commission members, thank you all for spending the time we have on this. Staff, thank you for drafting this regulation. And I wish this was a simple problem. I do think that it's going to require regulation, and it is going to require threading the needle in a number of ways. And I think that this version is an excellent way to do it. I think it's even better than the first shot, but I think it will become better upon discussion. I see that there are two poles here. I represent, I introduced a regulation I did based on the homeowners whom I represent. And basically, their point of view is we have this problem here. We don't care what happens to anybody else. You just have to solve this problem for us. And we don't want to hear about complaints from property owners or whatever. You just have to solve this problem for us, which you can understand where they're coming from, but is probably not a balanced way to regulate. Then you have the property owners, and you heard a couple of them tonight, and they said, first of all, they said, this is just an east side problem, it's not a problem in Elmhurst. I might say that when Councilman Ryan's version came up about the single-family homes 3 years ago, there were tons and tons of people coming in from Elmhurst saying, this is a big problem. And you had those property owners there opposing what was approved, saying any regulation is going to kill us in our industry. It's going to bring about catastrophe. And we oppose this, and it's illegal. So, they weren't very pleased with that type of regulation, and somehow they managed to live with it once it was enacted. And I haven't read Bob's or the Planning Department's memo on existing regulation, but it's my understanding that there's a cap of 4 in Boston and I believe Cambridge or Somerville. So when I hear this argument, if you introduce any regulation to us landlords in Providence, it's going to destroy the economy here. I hope our economy is destroyed if that brings us up to the development they have in Boston. And that seems to me to be a bit of an overstatement. Then I hear about these legal issues. You have very competent legal staff who will analyze these things. But one thing I think those folks have to answer is the fact that, like it or not, we've had this 3 unrelated people ordinance on the books for decades. And they chose to build with that thing on the books. And maybe they received informal assurances that it would not be enforced against them. But I would suspect, and again I'll defer to legal counsel, they're going to have a very difficult time saying that they have some legal right to build something that was against the law that was on the books at the time that they built it. I think that this notion of having everybody come to the table, having discussions, it's something you have to do. I hope it works out, and I hope when the property owners do come to the table, frankly, they're a little more reasonable than what I heard tonight. In the meantime, it's a very difficult process. I don't think there are easy solutions, and I thank you very much for undertaking this issue, and I look forward to working with you any way I can to move it forward.
Thank you, Councilman. We have one more person. This will be the last from the public before we close this up. We want to end up around 5:30.
Thank you. My name is Rose Siegel. I live at 26 Dexter Street. I didn't get a copy of the ordinance, and if this is a copy, I'm going to take it. There were a couple of concerns I had about this, and the reason that I showed up not having even seen the ordinance was because several years ago I had gotten, I am a resident of the West End, and I'm also a landlord. I have several properties that I have fixed up and that I rent out. I do not rent to students. I have mostly young professionals between the age of 25 and 45. Sometimes I have couples and families, but they mostly seem to be unrelated professional adult people. I had gotten a tax assessment on one of my properties several years ago that was more than double what it had been the previous year, and more than double when I looked on the tax assessor's database than what any of the other neighboring properties were. So I naturally scheduled to go talk to them because I assumed it was a typo, literally. And I went in there and said, well, these are what the neighboring houses are all assessed at. This is a typo. And they said, oh, no, it's student housing. I'm like, A, I don't rent to students, and B, I didn't know that was a whole separate thing. So my concern in addressing this student housing issue is who goes to check who's a student? I think that landlords registering and having to go through some kind of special use permit is incredibly onerous. When I renovate places, my contractors pull permits. There are inspectors that come through. They know what's been built. They know that a 3-bedroom remains a 3-bedroom, a 4-bedroom remains a 4-bedroom. Sometimes I take 3 bedrooms and turn them into 2 bedrooms because there's more of a demand for that now. But my concern is that there's like, what do you have to do? Collect everyone's IDs and where they work and turn it in to prove that you do or don't have students? It just seems a little too complicated and weird, honestly. I understand that nobody wants to be living next to a frat house, but a lot of the schools do have good neighbor policies. Some of the houses that I have are next to multifamilies that are owned by out-of-state landlords who rent to students, and they can be problems. And I've called the off-student housing office, let them know that there were late-night parties going on there. They talk to their students. If the problem doesn't stop, they talk to those students' parents, and those students are facing suspension. So there are ways that these off-campus housing coordinators, they know where their students are, they know how to address these things. It's a matter of letting people know that there are boundaries, that students can't just do whatever they want, that they need to respect common decency and noise ordinances and that sort of thing. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to close the public comment section. I think we're at a point where we know we need to work on this just a little bit more. I think you have a lot of feedback from the public, from us, on what we think. Is there any final things to add?
Excuse me, you said I didn't get a chance to sign up. I got here a little late. I think you said earlier at the beginning you'd have a chance to.
We were trying to cut it off at 5:30.
Can I get 30 seconds?
Can I reopen?
Well, yeah, you can. Just be
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. My name is John Dooley, and I'm a member of the Providence Apartment Association, one of the founding members. We're a bunch of the little guys. Well, some of the bigger guys like Bob and stuff, they have a lot of properties. Most people in Providence.
Can you say your name and address again?
I'm sorry, John Dooley. My address is 12 Goldmine Road.
Okay.
And I bought and fixed up a number of properties. I went to Providence College, and I've lived in the city for a long, long time. I actually finally moved out. But there's a couple of points I just wanted to make. One is that just be very cognizant. One of the problems as landlords, and I've talked to some of the people in the city about this before, is that when you find the landlords, everyone's like, oh, the landlord. We can't even pass on fines and fees and stuff that we get hit with because of students or any tenant that does something wrong or that causes a fee. We're not allowed to take that out of our security deposit. You're only allowed to take out damage to the property and unpaid rent. Okay, so that's one thing. I've also was working with Bob and some of the people over around Providence College. I don't even own any property over there, just because I had kind of an understanding of the area and some of the landlords there and city council people. And I think they're working together well. And that's because that's one of the problems, is that the city says, well, we only know that you own the building. We don't know who the tenants are. And every landlord I've ever talked to would be more than willing to, as long as it's a reasonable thing, work with the city, work with the colleges, because they're the ones that really, they can hold up you getting your degree or anything. They can hold back if you have fines or something with the school. So I just wanted to make sure you guys keep that in mind. And that also, I think there's a lot of stuff, and keep it simple, stupid, that's something I always try to live by, and it just seems to me, but and it's something Bob had mentioned, and I've always said this, that if the city has already determined how many legal bedrooms are in a unit, then if we just have to think that's it, that's how many non-related people you can have living in the unit. It seems to me that would be a reasonable compromise and keep things from going crazy in the frat houses. If you had a six-bedroom...
I'm going to cut you off pretty soon because you already over 30
All right,
seconds.
just
That'll be
finish
less
that
than
point.
what we're
I
recommending
understand,
now.
but I'm just saying, if you had a six-bedroom house and you had 6 non-related people living in there,
it would be illegal.
That would be illegal. And if you had a 2-bedroom apartment and you had again, you had 5 people living in there, that would be legal. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Again, this is not the last time you will be able to have public comment on this issue. This is not the last hearing at all. We will be coming back, and again, even when this is put forward to the City Plan Commission, that's another open meeting, and then when it's presented to the City Council after recommendation from the City Plan Commission, there's another public meeting. So this is by far not the last time you will have a chance to have your voice heard.
Michael, can I just clarify? We're going to have another subcommittee meeting before recommend.
I was going to try to get to that. So first of all, I mean, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we appreciate both the investment in the city and the student fabric of this city. And we also appreciate the quality of life issues that go into that. Where there is no silver bullet, we're not going to find one. But I think the balance between the students, property owners, city, and all of these issues, I think we're trying to suss out and find what works on a broad stroke, because we cannot address every single individual issue. We need to find something that's fair and equitable to all parties. I think we do have to figure out how to get the schools involved, but again, we can't really legislate that. We need to open up discussions. And I think Bob has a lot of information. The planning department, our famous John Beck. You're the most famous person here today. Brown student, come back, done good. Thank you. I think we have a lot to pull from. You know how our discussion has landed. The public has weighed in quite a bit, and I think I would like to reconvene this at least one more time before we push anything forward to the City Plan Commission.
Is that a motion, sir?
I can't make the motion, but you can.
I make a motion to have another meeting in which we perhaps a roundtable, but I'd first like to say that I think that this really is an excellent document because it illustrates how crucial it is that we solve this in a less draconian way. And so I just make a motion to have another subcommittee meeting as soon as convenient for you guys.
I'll second it.
And then I guess you can vote.
Do we want to schedule it now, or do you want to?
So
do we want to do it now, Bob, or do we want to wait until
I don't know.
the next meeting?
I mean, I think we have a lot to work with here. We heard a lot of good things, and we can work on this ordinance. I think that maybe it would help if we had when we come back, besides having a revised ordinance, what else would you like us to do? What other avenues would you like us to explore?
I think reaching out to the schools and find out what they have now and what they're willing to do and share with the city is a good first step.
Yeah. And along that line, I think we've been told that there's apparently a model in place. Apparently in Elmhurst, there is a working relationship with Providence College. I think that's a model. I'd like to know a little more about that. I think there's there are certain things that have been said, you know, there seems to be almost extraordinary agreement that one person per bedroom that's agreed to. I mean, that's almost, I think developing a better relationship with the school is basically what almost everybody has said from very different points of the spectrum. I think we just have to maybe have a round table. I'm not sure how good that would be, but I do think that this has been great to have everybody, to hear these different opinions and thoughts, and I'm happy to hear that so many of them are actually pretty close together.
Yeah, I think we're not that far off, it seems, from some sort of consensus. Some people like the language, some people don't like the language. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of people who are in their argument over the numbers, if we did it by bedrooms or some sort of less onerous registration process. I think we're on the right track. Anything that you have to add, Nicole?
No, I think that sounds great.
Okay, then we will close this subcommittee of the City Planning Commission at 6:42, and we will 5:42. Thank you. And we will set another date at. And we have a meeting next week, so we can set that next week when you digest all this and figure out how long it'll take. All right, thank you.